So for clarity, I actually haven't been doing this job since 1999, but the organization has been around since 1999. Yeah, exactly, ambiguous. But I'm delighted to be here. Bula Vinaka, it's great to pay honor to Fiji and bring us this great tool of dialogue and storytelling to try to make our points on climate change. I have a real problem, though, because my problem is that I'm like this unrehabilitated climate geek. So it's kind of like we share this, I think, in terms of being able to get through a talk without going into charts and graphs and numbers. And the Talanoa dialogues have challenged us on this because they've made us try to be able to talk to real people without acronyms. And so I'm going to try to get through this without using acronyms. And if you see me use an acronym, you're free to sort of like throw a flag or something that I should stop doing that. I do head up this business association that is part of the solution side of climate change. And many of us are preparing for Katowice next week. And in my group, we pay a lot of attention to one particular part of the negotiations, which is about Article 6. And that's an article included that talks about ways that international cooperation can take place using markets or non-markets, but that businesses can sort of cooperate across international borders and countries can cooperate across international borders. And I thought it was great that Jacinda's remarks sort of referenced cooperation as an important ethic in all of this, because that's really what the UN meetings are about, is what are we going to decide to do together, not what you're just going to do by yourselves. Otherwise, you don't really need to go to Katowice if you're just going to talk about what you're going to do at home. So this particular event coming up is, I think, remarkable because of the work in these Talanoa dialogues over the years and because of this new report on 1.5 degrees that's actually challenging everyone to think again about what does it take to get where we need to go. I've had this privilege of being a part of a number of Talanoa dialogues around the world this year, and in all of the ones that I've been in, there's been a real technological optimism, there's been a real optimism about engaging all different constituencies in the climate effort. And then in the finance world, it's sort of like, well, it gets a little bit dodgy about, well, how are we going to mobilize the money to do all of this? As we look at the recent report, one of the things that I think struck a lot of my members was it didn't have a lot in it about cooperation. And part of the reason for that was it was based on a lot of economic modeling that was done before Paris. So you didn't really know before Paris whether there was going to be a provision to support cooperation or not. So it's been really interesting to turn to the modeling community and say, well, why hasn't this been done? And could we get some of that done? Because actually in the business world, economic modeling is part of our storytelling. It's how you sort of convince the bosses to go forward and do things. So we in my organization have been working recently with some economic modelers, climate modelers at the University of Maryland. And we asked them sort of, what is this cooperation worth? What is Article 6 worth? And they've come back with some initial findings, not about what it would take to get to 1.5 degrees or even to 2 degrees. It's just what would happen if the current NDCs, the current national communications or national contributions, what if they were just held constant to the end of the century? What is it worth? If they're allowed to cooperate or if they're not allowed to cooperate? And what their initial findings show is that by 2100, okay, by the end of the century, just the current commitments, if there's cooperation, are $1 trillion a year less expensive than they would be without the cooperation. $1 trillion by then. Now that's a long way off, right? And so interestingly, the Environmental Defense Fund, a group that I actually worked for in an earlier stage in my career, they've done a similar take on this, and their findings on it were not about cost savings, but they were about how much more ambition could be expected for the same amount of investment. And what they found is sort of the flip side of this. You could enable double the ambition for the same amount of investment. So that really turns back to me about, well, in the business community, do we really think this can work? to mobilize that kind of level of cooperation, that kind of level of market activity, because it does imply that governments actually get together and work together aggressively in making these systems work. And what gives me encouragement is I think back to earlier in my career. So my career has been really checkered past. I started in government. I was a U.S. delegate in Kyoto. I started my career on Capitol Hill before that, working on the U.S. acid rain trading program. I saw how it worked on that program. First of all, it worked politically in that it got Democrats and Republicans together. It got Democrats on board because it got more emission reductions than they thought Republicans would ever agree to. And for the Republicans, it got this this cost efficiency that they were looking for. But when I really got a sense of how it could work was when I left the Clinton administration in 1999 or 1998. I went to work first for the Environmental Defense Fund, and they sent me on this wonderful trip to Russia. And I went on a horseback ride in Russia that changed my life. Horseback ride. I went to a carbon forum in Moscow. And at the end of it, I had noticed these guys that were so enthusiastic, these young entrepreneurs from a company called NatSource. And I thought they were amazing because they brought, I guess I'd been spending my career with government bureaucrats, and these guys brought such energy and enthusiasm to it. And we were walking after dinner one night, and these girls came out of Red Square on horses. And one of these guys was so bold as to talk to them, and it turns out one of them spoke English, and he talked them into letting us ride their horses around the edge of Red Square. So after that, I was just so amazed by these guys. I said, you know, I think if I was younger, I'd like to do what you do. But, you know, it seems like a young man's game. I was like 40. I was old. And the next week, I got a call from their boss saying, were you serious about that? Would you like to do this instead of talking about it? Anyway, it took a while to talk me into it, but I ended up going and working in that field. And what I saw was that market signal did create an entrepreneurial class that was willing to search the globe for emission reductions. And I found myself a guy who had organized meetings for President Clinton in the cabinet room and been in the Oval Office. And I knew I had sort of really arrived in carbon markets when I was standing on a Korean landfill talking about how beautiful it was because it didn't have any methane capture on it yet. And so it was a real wonderful opportunity to bring to market. So that's the power of these markets and the power, I think, of Article 6 to actually enable at least part of the scaling up of ambition that's needed. Thank you.